for coming. Today we have another guest speaker for One Health 1000. It's sort of a special guest speaker who's coming from outside the university, and we have sort of members of the broader university community watching online as well. So I just want to say thanks to the One Health Institute for helping organize and getting me in touch with our speaker for today. So today we have the pleasure of hearing from Marie Meloche, who's the Director of Programs at the Jane Goodall Institute. And so Marie and her organization do all sorts of fabulous sort of One Health related work in West Africa that we're going to hear about today. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Marie. And if there's any questions, I think maybe for questions, we'll just wait till the end. It might just be easiest with the hybrid format. Does that work for you?
Yes, of course.
Okay.
Quinn, should I share my screen right away?
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay, do that.
Thanks. And I'll just mute myself on this end, so we'll be able to hear you, but you won't hear any sort of background noise here.
Okay, all good. Just interrupt me if there's anything that's unclear, if the presentation doesn't work, see you on the screen. All right. Well, let's get started. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for welcoming me today. And thank you, Quinn, for the introduction. My name is Marie, as you mentioned, and I've been working with the Jane Goodall Institute of Canada since 2018. I started as a program officer and then a program manager. I've had the pleasure of working with colleagues in Canada and in sub-Saharan Africa implementing community-centered conservation projects. I'll tell you more about that, but today I just want to take the opportunity to just say hi to everyone. I hope you're having a great day and looking forward to sharing and hearing from you today. I would also like to mention that I'm joining you from the Jane Goodall Institute of Canada's office in downtown Toronto, which is located on the traditional territory of many Indigenous peoples, including the Haudenosaunee Nations, Huron-Wendat, Mississaugas of the Credit, and other nations that have cared for the land for many generations. The Jane Goodall Institute of Canada is honored to support Indigenous-led conservation and cultural revitalization, and we commit to ongoing contributions to reconciliations and decolonization in Canada and abroad. So today I'll tell you a little bit more about community-centered conservation and One Health in action. How does it show up in our work? What's our approach to it? I think it can be an interesting take on One Health and what it can look like in practice. But before I talk about that, we'll talk about someone you certainly know, Dr. Jane. I think everyone has seen, heard about her. So Dr. Jane is a living legend, alive to this day, if anyone is wondering. So Jane started her legacy in 1957 when at the age of 23, she accepted an invitation to go visit a friend in Kenya. When she was there, she met with Louis Leakey. What are the odds, right? But she did meet with anthropologist, paleontologist Louis Leakey, who recruited her to conduct research on wild chimpanzees. He wanted to work with her because she was a young, bright, and curious young woman, very resourceful, who he considered had an unbiased mind when it comes to observation, that she didn't have the full academic background, and that she would just observe, the chimpanzees in their habitats with the curiosity that would lead to discoveries. And so in 1960, Jane made her second and historic journey to Africa. She went into the chimpanzees' habitats of the Forest of Gombe Forest National Park in Tanzania, which is in the East Africa region of the continent. Many scientists didn't believe that her findings were reputable, that it could be, something that would impact the scientific community because she was so inexperienced. And she also named chimpanzees, which was not considered as best practice. She really lived in their societies. She did spend a lot of time just observing and being accepted by the chimps, and she discovered many amazing things, including, information about the social structure of the chimpanzee societies, the bond between mother and child, and also the fact that chimpanzees use tools, which was a first, at least for more Western scientists to observe that they use twigs to eat ants. And upon that discovery, Dr. Louis Leakey mentioned the famous quote to Jane that now we must redefine tool, redefine man, or accept chimpanzees as human. Is everything still okay for the sound? All good? Okay. And so we know that chimpanzees are our closest cousins in the animal kingdom. We share 98.6% of the same DNA. Chimpanzees are known to exhibit remarkably human-like behaviors, such as grieving over the loss of a loved one, generating strategies to thrive as a social group, and even learning sign language. Over the years, Jane's research in Gombe continued, where she learned more about chimpanzees and established eventually the Gombe Stream Research Center, which became a training ground for people interested in studying primates. Today, Gombe is a living laboratory, home to the longest-running wild chimpanzee study in the world. It just celebrated 60 years, and the groundbreaking scientific research is still ongoing. At almost 90, Dr. Jane still travels the world about 300 days a year to inspire people, spread her message of hope through action. She usually visits Canada twice a year, and actually we're going to be lucky to have her join us here in Canada in the spring in April. And usually she comes twice, once in the spring, once in the fall, and hopefully she will be able to continue doing so for a long time. And so, founded in 1977, the Jane Goodall Institute is a worldwide community-centered conservation organization that advances the vision and the work of Dr. Jane. We have offices in more than 30 countries and programs in more than 50. So, we have JGI USA, Canada, France, China, Malaysia, Senegal, Tanzania, Uganda, Republic of Congo, South Africa, you name it. There's so many chapters all around the world. And so the organization aims to understand chimpanzees and other wildlife and their habitats, yes, but it also aims to create an informed and compassionate multitude to help build a better world for people, other animals, and our shared environment. In 1991, when Jane was in Tanzania, she met a group of 12 high school students who wanted to make a positive impact in their community. They wanted to find a solution to the different challenges they identified and to just lead a project that would make a difference. And so Jane worked with them to bring their vision to life, and so the first Roots and Shoots group was born. Roots and Shoots is the youth leadership program that is still active to this day and is touching people all around the world, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. And so this is the whole idea behind Dr. Jane's approach to individual action, that every individual matters, every individual has a role to play, and every individual makes a difference. So sometimes we might think, what can I do to make a difference? In this idea, even the smallest of ripple can create a great impact around the world. And here in Canada, so more specifically, our chapter here in Canada, so we are the second largest chapter, not in terms of the number of staff members, but in terms of the scope of our programs in Canada and in support of our colleagues in the chapters located in sub-Saharan Africa. We're a small but mighty team of 15 people, so we get a lot done, but I just want to really give credit where it's due. The work on the ground is completely done by our colleagues in the different countries, and they're the superstars and the heroes in conservation in the areas where we find the wild chimpanzees. So the Jane Goodall Institute of Canada, the Canadian chapter, our mission is to honor Jane's legacy of hope through action. We mobilize widespread movements addressing the convergence of three main crises, so climate change, biodiversity loss, and environmental inequity, across Canada, but also in support of communities in Canada and in Africa. So the approach of addressing the convergence of the three crises is really an intersectional approach, centering gender equality, but also Indigenous perspectives and the way we understand how the three spheres are interconnected. We recognize the importance of centering Indigenous worldviews in the sense that they recognize that humans are not separate from the environment and that we have an unbreakable and sacred connection to the land that requires humans to have respect and to strive to maintain a balance in coexisting with the land and the species that inhabit it. In terms of community-centered conservation and focusing a little bit more on the link with One Health. So how does it all work together? So basically, we apply an equity-focused intersectional lens to our work with partners and with communities, aiming to leave no one behind. So we target the most vulnerable, marginalized groups that are the most impacted by the three crises. So by climate change, by biodiversity loss, and environmental inequity. This approach addresses the needs of local communities, particularly the most marginalized and vulnerable, while working to improve their environment, which consequently has an impact on the biodiversity. And here, biodiversity is understood also as, yes, animal biodiversity, but also forest biodiversity, fauna, flora, and all of the different components that make a healthy ecosystem. And this holistic approach recognizes that interconnectedness between animals, people, and the environment. And we reposition the human being as being a keystone species in the local and global ecosystem. So we're really drifting away from perceiving the human being as being, at the top of the pyramid and everything else existing to support its development. We consider that human beings are part of the animal and human ecosystem in a interconnected and interdependent way with all other spheres. And the focus on gender equality goes back to the idea of environmental inequity. Climate change affects everyone, but women are the most impacted, especially young women, and understanding that different groups are impacted differently and that the communities that contribute the least to climate change are usually the ones the most impacted by its consequences. So our interventions, and again, always in collaboration and in close solidarity with our colleagues and friends in the different chapters, are really found at the nexus, connecting the community well-being, habitat conservation, and animal protection. And so that idea of One Health is really around that interconnectedness. So we understand that it is an underlying principle that informs natural law in most Indigenous cultures, because of that understanding that humans are not separate from the environment. So we do recognize that kinship relationship between humans, the environment, and the animals that depend on it. And I think the approach of One Health, if it was ever questioned by the greater public with everything that went on with the pandemic, it is no longer a question mark as to how we are so very connected. And if one sphere is affected, all is affected. So I think that was a good lesson of humility for the humankind to remember that we're not immune to the impact of zoonotic diseases and the interconnectedness between animals, people, and the environment. Sometimes, and I just want to go more specifically to our work with our colleagues in Africa programs, a question we get very often is, yeah, that sounds great, but so what's the link between the chimps and the work that you do? I hope that this idea of interconnectedness makes a bit more sense. But then here's where we work. You have on the left side the geographic range of the chimpanzees, the wild chimpanzees. So, we would work elsewhere if there were chimpanzees, wild chimpanzees elsewhere, but you can see with the map on the right side, the green map, that our programs in sub-Saharan Africa are where we find wild chimpanzees. So it goes from Senegal all the way to Tanzania. So it's really some kind of a belt, and we call this the chimpscape countries. And that's where you find our Africa programs. And so we have colleagues in the JGI, so Jane Goodall Institute chapters in Senegal. There's some programs in Liberia and Sierra Leone, in Uganda, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Tanzania, and a lot of also other initiatives that touch other stakeholders, especially when we talk about wildlife corridors, but I'll tell you more about that later. And here in Canada, we work across the country through the Roots and Shoots program, and also, in close collaboration and partnerships with organizations, grassroots organizations and community-based organizations, including Indigenous partners that are well implemented and do the work in their communities. So you can see on the map that, yes, of course, it's more concentrated where there's more population in the southern parts of the country, but we have initiatives, youth-led and community-led initiatives reaching all the way to the great north of the country. I would like to tell you more about a very interesting approach that we have seen lead to tremendous impact on the ground, the Takari framework. It goes back to basically putting community-centered conservation in action. And this Takari approach is a framework that was launched by the Jane Goodall Institute in 1994, primarily in Tanzania, again, where the Gombe National Park is. And it is the original chapter and the biggest one in terms of the number of staff, and after the US maybe, but it is a very important chapter in our Africa programs. And so the Takari approach, or the Take Care approach, is a framework for community-centered conservation. And the goal is to develop a holistic and sustainable approach to improving the health of people, animals, and the environment they depend on. So it is an approach that is basically community-focused and community-led, with communities that live where we find wild chimpanzees. So a lot of communities live in rural areas, and in some cases, especially in the Gombe National Park, for example, they can seriously live side by side. They might share the same water spots as the chimpanzees. They might use the same forest products to feed their families as the chimpanzees eat. So there's a lot of close connection with the chimpanzee populations. And so the communities hold a lot of knowledge and power to develop and implement sustainable conservation initiatives and have ownership of the results. So the Takari approach has this framework that is really interconnected and a cyclical approach that allows for adapted solutions to be driven by the local communities. So the pictures you see on the right side is part of the community mapping exercise done by the community. So you can see on the top side that the community members drew the map of their village, their community, on the ground. So it's an approach that allows for many different ways of understanding this, the space, and also of documenting it. It can be using paper, it can be using maps, as you see on the lower picture here. It can be just drawing the space on the ground using leaves and rocks and whatever is available to generate an idea of the shared space. And so those communities have been partners in conservation with the Jane Goodall Institute for a very long time, on top of being, conservation leaders well before JGI was ever part of the conversation. And so we engage with those communities through reciprocal relationships, building and leveraging their Indigenous knowledge of the landscape, the human, animal, and environmental landscape, but also their understanding of climate change adaptation and mitigation. They implement solutions every day. Nature-based solutions is nothing new to them. They've been doing the work for a very long time, and they deal with the impact of climate change every day, and they know best. So we're really engaging with those communities through a very reciprocal relationship. And so we also understand that those communities have been living in areas that have a lot of important biodiversity, including chimpanzees, but not limited to chimpanzees. There are lots of other fauna or flora that is part of the biodiversity that indicates the health of the ecosystem. So they are experts in all things environment where they live. And they are able also to identify and to understand the threats to the well-being of the ecosystem. So as part of the listen and understand part of the Takari approach, we engage with communities through participatory, co-creative consultation processes, including participatory mapping, but it also is part of drafting conservation action plans. So those conservation action plans are basically the result of a very thorough consultation process with different stakeholders, including communities, where they would identify the threats that they see in their communities. And it can be threats from different sources, most of the time human-made threats, but basically what affects their well-being, the well-being of the environment, of the animals, and they are partners in drafting the potential solutions to guide the strategies. And those results is what guides how we work. We don't come from, our chapter here in Canada saying, looks like you might need this. It's really, okay, so if those threats and solutions were identified by the communities through different processes, including community mapping, then we adapt our intervention to those priorities, always seeing the local communities as partners in conservation. And so again, really building on existing Indigenous local knowledge, they have tested and approved climate change adaptation and mitigation strategies for a very long time. And so our approach to community-centered conservation is with, by, and for the communities. There's also a component of facilitate. You can see after the understand. So the facilitation is really where I see the Jane Goodall Institute's role or added value. It's to empower the individuals or to give them the tools and the technical knowledge to go further in defining and implementing solutions and implementing the solutions themselves. We really see ourselves as bridges with different resources, including financial resources, but they are really the leaders in those solutions, including, for example, land use plans, conservation action plans, campaigns to counter wild meat trade. Again, depends on what the community identified as being a main priority. And we also see our role as taking a step back. So we want to be hands off, but have our eyes on. And what you see here on those pictures are the very fun part of using technology to then bring the conversation further. So on the left side, what you see is a satellite map of the area, and different community members are identifying. It can be a hotspot for biodiversity. It can be areas where they've seen chimpanzees before. It can be areas that are used for agricultural land. So they're very much part of the conversation, but they are also able to contribute to generating data that is then used to inform projects. So what you see on the top side with the smartphone is part of the community-led data collection. So we use different systems, including Kobo Collect, Survey 123, different GIS mapping systems that are very easy to use and usually use a cloud system, and community monitors or forest monitors. Different countries have different terminologies for those monitors, but they would participate in data collection either through ecological surveys. It can be through just assessment of the ecosystem that they see. So it might be a spot check, but usually the countries do have a system for ecological survey, usually twice a year. And so that cutting edge data collection and cloud-based sharing platforms help document and combine local knowledge and values with science data models and innovative research to spark new solutions and insight. So it's really building on the existing knowledge and just going a step further. And so the core of the conservation work supports community-led approaches and decision-makings from the ground to the cloud. Because those maps, so you see on the bottom part, the map here is the result of all of that data collection conducted by community members. So those maps can be used to identify the threats and the changing threats. One thing we need to remember is that in rural areas, in those very important locations, for example, this region is in Senegal, things change from one year to the next. You will see different bushfires coming up that weren't there the year before. You might have flooding that came up at an unexpected time or at a quantity that was not anticipated. So it's really important to understand that from one year to the next, the data collected really helps navigate the current state of the ecosystem and the landscape. And it can also be used to inform decision-making with local stakeholders and local authorities. So using that information, they might decide to focus more on expanding the protected area or working with a certain mayor of a commune because we identified a lot of human-made threats in their area. So we can try to see what is the cause of that. So it is a local level data generated for the purpose of informing our spatial understanding of the ecosystems. So I think that's pretty interesting, and it is really something that helps different chapters, including our own chapters, to understand the changes. So yeah, and I wanted to show you as well what it can look like. So what you see here is an area in the Gombe National Park near the Kibale village. So what you see on the left side is in 2005 a satellite image of the area. So you can see a lot of space that has been deforested for agricultural land. There's not a lot of forest cover. And then in 2013, you see the exact same area, and you can really see the difference. The forest cover is increased. You can see a lot of greenery, and just generally the forest looks a lot healthier. And that's a direct impact of community-centered conservation initiatives. That's the long-term impact of doing all of those processes of having communities have ownership of their conservation initiatives. And I mean, that's one example, but I could show you so many. It really works, and it shows, and satellite imagery really helps to visualize that. And the Jane Goodall Institute has an ongoing partnership with ESRI, with NASA as well. Maybe some of you have seen the recent video that came up using the Maxar satellite to have very, very high definition, high quality satellite imagery of some key areas in those chimscape countries. So we can try to find linkages between the intervention of course, JGI, but many other local and external actors to improve the well-being of the ecosystem. And what's interesting also is that the research and conservation team can provide satellite images from the same area across different timelines to see the changes. For better or for worse, sometimes we would also see the level of deforestation and habitat destruction, but in some really great situations, we actually see positive changes. So I wanted to show you that instead of the doom and gloom of what we usually see. And so what does it look like in practice, right? What does community-centered conservation looks like in practice, the day-to-day? So you might say, okay, well, that looks great. I get the idea, but what do you do? It can look like many things, depending, again, on the priorities and the threats and the focus that the communities identified. But it can look like women using raw materials like straw to produce biocharcoal. You can see them on the top left corner. Biocharcoal is an income generating opportunities for women, but for communities in general. But again, having that equity lens, we target the most vulnerable or marginalized groups. Most of the time, women are the ones who are the target groups. And so it's an income generating opportunity for women. And when women thrive, the communities thrive. That's also an important thing to understand, that if their income is better, their families are better taken care of, and generally the communities just do better. And so biocharcoal is also an alternative to cutting trees and to producing illegal traditional charcoal. And it's an innovative use of straw. Straw is a raw materials that, because of the dry season, contributes to uncontrolled forest fires, because, it's drier for longer and there's unpredictable rainfall patterns. So biocharcoal is a climate smart solution. It can also look like the top right corner at the two hands. So this is fonio. Fonio is a drought-resistant indigenous crop. So women-led cooperatives produce, transform, and sell fonio. Again, an income-generating opportunities, and also that gives an opportunity for women to engage in climate-smart agriculture, providing food security and sustainable livelihoods, and ultimately their entire community benefits. It can also look like maternity clinics. You see all those beautiful mothers at the bottom left. So providing maternity clinics and services in remote villages. So that includes vaccination services for newborns and children, pre and postnatal care, family planning services for the mothers and their partners. So having men also be more engaged is a sustainable solution to bring in sexual reproductive health and rights services into the communities. And so this contributes to healthier families who are better equipped to care for their children and lead to overall better well-being for their communities. And it can also look like agroforestry initiatives, including community-led nurseries that grow indigenous tree seedlings to plant either in ecologically adapted forest areas for reforestation efforts. And it can also be fruit trees that are planted near their homes to address their food needs and represent also an income-generating opportunities. When communities have access to adapted resources near them, they're less likely to go into the forest to harvest forest products, therefore taking the resources that should be that can be used by chimpanzees. A lot of the fruits that the chimps like, humans like, again, we're not surprised, we're so alike, but it can create a bit of challenges if habitat destruction leads to chimpanzees looking for the same fruits, coming closer to the inhabited areas. So those are a few examples. So the women with the biocharcoal are in Uganda. The Fonio is one of our projects in Senegal. We have the mothers here was in the Democratic Republic of Congo. We also have agroforestry initiatives in Tanzania, but there are so many other examples and I can tell you more about it. But yes, and I have a little video to end, and then I believe there's going to be a Q&A portion, but I wanted to just finish with a nice video that we have representing basically the Jane Goodall Institute of Canada's approach. Quinn, if you can't hear the sound, just please let me know, otherwise I'll just let it play.
Yeah, we can't hear it on our end.
You can't hear it, okay. And you can hear it even from my microphone because it's playing.
No.
Okay. Well, that's fine. I can play it, of course. It's just the message is kind of the part, but I think when you can share with everyone afterwards, but I'll just let it play for maybe people online who might be able to hear it. Yes, so feel free to visit our website, lots of information. Also, I think you have a few, many young people in the room. We have our Youth Advisory Council that will recruit for the new cohort soon. So please take a look at the website if you're interested in getting involved and contributing. We also have a web version of our latest annual report that looks great and is also a very interesting way to learn more, especially about our initiatives here in Canada with Indigenous partners, and so I think there's a lot there that you can use if you want to learn more. So yes, thank you so much. For the video, Quinn, we can figure out how to play it later. Otherwise, I'll just leave it in the presentation.
Okay, great. Thanks, Marie. We'll give you a quick round of applause. Thank you. So yeah, we can do sort of a Q&A with folks online and in the room. So any questions for Marie? Yeah.
How do your conservation methods differ depending on the country that you're working with, or even kind of the area? Because I've heard of multiple ways, but still.
Okay, I just want to make sure I understood the question. How do the conservation approaches differ depending on the countries, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, great. Thank you so much for your question. So it goes back to the consultation process. So indeed, we might think, oh, all the countries certainly need reforestation. They certainly need potable water, right? So basically, we don't go in with the assumption of what they need. Through the consultation process, including the Conservation Action Plan, we hold consultations with different stakeholders. So it can be, political leaders, it can be, environmental NGO representative, ministries of the family of environment, of water and forests, and community representatives. And they identify what is the most important to them, what is impacting their day-to-day the most. And basically, as a result of that, we develop a system that's a conceptual model. So that basically links the threats to the different causes and consequently the possible solutions or strategies to address those. So I would say that it's an exercise that is done, I believe it's done every 5 years or so, but when we do have an initiative or a funding that we see, oh, that would be interesting, we reach out to our colleagues in the local chapter and say, what are you currently doing? What does the community need? What are the current priorities? And we adapt to that. And that's very important for sustainability, because if we had a very top-down approach of saying, well, we went to visit and it looks like you might need this, and it's not actually what the community needs, it's not going to work in the long run. And we have seen so many examples where the conservation solutions are based on assumptions, not necessarily locally led solutions. And, if you build I don't know, I'm giving an example, a school, oh, looks like that's what you need. If the community is not on board and is not the holder of the initiative, it's going to close in no time and it's not going to be used. So I would say it's going to the community, starting from their identified priorities and building around that.
Any other questions in the room? Online? I have a question for you, Marie.
Yeah.
So you talk a lot about chimps. Is the sort of like conservation angle, like the animal conservation angle, is it exclusively to chimps? I noticed on the map you also had bonobos, which are the same genus, different species.
Totally, great observation. No, it's not limited to chimps, it's also great apes. So depending on the area, it does include great apes. So, well, not Africa, not orangutan, but gorillas, bonobos, chimps as keystone species. But it can also include, depending on, again, the country and what we're doing, but we might have a biodiversity indicator that could include other endangered species on the red list of IUCN. It can also include big mammals, because usually, when there are big mammals, it means the ecosystem thrives. That can include, the big cats, so cheetahs, lions, and the likes, depending on the countries, or elephants. I'll give you an example in Senegal recently with the camera traps. So that's very interesting as well. And that's a way to do some data collection and monitoring. We recently saw a breed of, species, of monkeys, not apes, but monkeys, who were never seen in that area before. They usually are in Guinea. So it means that they are migrating from the Guinea region into Senegal. So that gives us indication on the movement of species and the overall ecosystem health. And the other thing is that for the first time in, I don't know how long, but I know it's a very long time, we saw a leopard. So that's a great indicator that the biodiversity is thriving, or at least is not decreasing. And unfortunately, I wish I could tell you, the biodiversity is increasing. In the medium, shorter term, if the biodiversity cannot be further destroyed, that's a great result. And that's the maybe unfortunate realization that expecting to increase biodiversity or the diversity of species present on a certain territory is sometimes a bit of an unrealistic expectation. But if we see biodiversity maintained, that's wonderful impact.
Thanks for that. I think looks like Allison from the JGI added,
Yeah.
In Canada, our partners identify both cultural keystone species and those that fall under protected classes. I don't know if you want to add to that, Marie, or.
Well, no, I mean, Allison said it best. So yes, of course, in the context of Canada, it is really with the local partners. So it is up to them to tell us what it is they want to focus on. And we don't question the understanding of the priorities, the idea of community, the idea of biodiversity. It is interpreted depending on the community's priority, and that's what we follow. So we try to really celebrate the local understanding of biodiversity and what they want to protect, but of course always bringing in that innovation, especially, and research piece through the Jane Goodall Institute. But we celebrate different ways of knowing and different wisdoms.
Thanks for that. So we'll go online, and then there's another one in person. So Kate Dewey asked, Marie, thank you for your wonderful presentation. Will you share with us how you came to be part of the Jane Goodall Institute of Canada? What is your background?
Oh, whew. So, I mean, I don't know how far to go. I was born in so basically I worked in international development in the Middle East for a few years, and that was I was working there. I worked with grassroots organizations. I worked with national organizations as well, and with Oxfam, so an international non-governmental organization, for 5 years. And I grew up in Montreal, did my studies there, but then quickly went abroad and got some experience working with partners there. So it was a very different situation. There were no chimps there, and there was nothing much about conservation. That was not my main focus. That was more about community mobilization, and youth-led and community-led action, and women's rights as well. And then when I moved back to Canada, it was just such an amazing opportunity with the Jane Goodall Institute. So I didn't have the full, conservation, environmental science background, but I had a different background. So that's how I think I ended up being part of the team. But I am learning every day. It's been a very interesting journey. I'm not an expert in GIS and satellite imagery and all that, but I am learning with our colleagues who are doing the work, and it's so interesting. So I hope to become more fluent in that in the coming years.
I'll just add to that. I think it's really important to note for someone like Marie, who has this specific background coming from a One Health approach, it's important to have people with varied backgrounds, because if you have a room full of people who all have the same disciplinary background, it's not really One Health at all. So I think that's
absolutely. Yes, and even on the team at JGI Canada, we all have different backgrounds. Some, well, Alison has a lot of experience in animal welfare, working with Indigenous partners as well. Some people are more about, biology and really the anthropology side as well. We have people who are very much in like fundraising for NGOs. So we really have different backgrounds. And at the end of the day, it's complementary expertise. And I would say One Health is really not limited to environmental science. On the contrary, I think when you really think of it, that interconnectedness is applicable to everything you do every day. Even today, when you go home or you're walking on the street, try to identify all the ways everything is interconnected and it's just all around us. So I think it is a framework that applies to any and all sectors.
I think we have a question in the class here.
This is kind of the same topic, but I was just wondering what kind of professions fall under the Jane Goodall Institute and who kind of works within it and the different kind of sectors, and if things like ecologists and climatologists come into play, like just the different kinds of professions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for that. So, I mean, it depends on the chapters. I would say with the JGI USA chapter, they have the most scientists, I would say. They have, the grade A conservation experts, people who have been studying primates for a very, very long time, who have lived near and in chimp communities and near primates to see how they live. And so you have really the science people who are all about biodiversity and biology, and then you have people who are maybe more versed in community mobilization. So a lot of our field agents, for example, are experts in community development. So, how to bring in women, how to bring in decision maker, the governance piece, how to make things happen, how to navigate protected areas and all of the policies and things like that. So that's also different. And then you have people like me, for example, who are more in, international development, program management, more into, liaising with institutional donors, putting together results-based management framework. So really having the more of the management part, because we need it all. You can't have a project led only by academics who do all of the science. Well, I guess you could, but you also need to have people who structure the work and do the reporting and make sure we're on track. So we also have finance people and communications. So how to build a strong message to make, a message land. And especially with conservation, it can be scary at times for people to hear about how terrible the situation is. And that's the message also through Jane's message is bringing hope. Well, in order to make hope an accessible idea, we need to create a message that is inspiring. So that is an expertise in itself. So I would say with a non-governmental organization like JGI, but with many others I've seen, it's people who have very different backgrounds. And I would say in my case, for example, I don't have the conservation biology and all of that background, but I am still able to have transferable skills that serve the organization. That being said, if there's one piece of advice I can give to anyone, if you're studying and you're trying to figure out what you want to do, it's great to have a general experience and expertise, but it is also a good idea to figure out if there's one added value, like something in particular you want to focus on more. Gender rights, it can be, it can be so many things. For me, it's more gender and that gender justice piece, but it could be, more of a results-based management, or it can be more focused on health, health services. So whatever it is, I would say that's what I've seen people really contribute the most to their organizations when they have a niche expertise, which you can get as you gain experience. Don't be worried. You'll learn as you go. But yeah, I would say that's something that serves usually pretty well.
Thanks for that, Marie. Any other questions? Yeah.
Hi, I'm wondering how the methods of studying chimpanzees has changed since Jane Goodall first studied them at the start of her career.
Well, yes. So I believe there's been a lot of changes in maybe how static the approach to science was. And so, a lot of Jane's work has been on observation. So it is, I think, now perceived as a data collection method that is as valuable. And at the end of the day, the results and the observations and the knowledge that she contributed to, knowledge that maybe was already present in the communities, but she brought it to, let's say, the Western scientific community. So yeah, the idea of having observation be a very good tool for data collection and scientific research. And so at the end of the day, I think the fact that, for example, she named the chimpanzees, but her results were still considered as breakthrough is a big change. Because at first they were saying, but well, if you don't number them, you have, you humanize them, and that's not scientific. But at the end of the day, aren't they a little bit close to the humankind when you look at it? So so I think she did contribute to a lot of updated ways of understanding scientific research. But that being said, I would say that a lot of the innovative work and research is really done by scientists and students who are working in and are from African countries. I mean, they have been experts in understanding the local environment. They know the hills and the parks and the forests know better than anyone. So bringing in that indigenous knowledge and that baseline connection with the ecosystem is also a very important part of the research work done in some areas. And I think that's also replicable here in our work in Canada. The way we generate information is very much informed by our partners, and we are testing different ways of doing data collection that is very much informed by best practices in that, partnership model we have with different communities and organizations.
Any other questions in the room or online? Anybody online have any questions or thoughts? Well, if there's nothing else, Marie, I will thank you again. That was really great. And yeah, we'll give you another round of applause. Yeah, I really appreciate it, and I think it's great to hear sort of a bit more about One Health in action, and we're sort of really rooted in academia and research, so it's nice to hear sort of a counter example.
Great, thank you so much for the invitation. That was great.
Yeah. All right. Thanks again. I'm gonna.
So I just hang up? What happens?
I guess so. I mean, we can chat if you want.
No, no.